The inheritance lawyer's words still rang in Sarah Rosewood's ears as she stood on the dusty main street of Laredo, Texas, clutching a folded document that was supposed to secure her future, but instead threatened to destroy it. Her father had died 3 months ago in the spring of 1882, leaving her his sprawling ranch that bordered the Rio Grande, 2,000 acres of prime grazing land that her grandfather had carved out of the wilderness 30 years before. But now, her uncle Nathaniel claimed the will was a forgery and had already moved his family into the ranch house while she'd been away settling her father's debts in San Antonio. Sarah had spent the last of her traveling money on the stagecoach ride back to Laredo, and now she stood in front of the land office with nothing but the clothes on her back, her mother's wedding ring, and a sick feeling in her stomach that justice might not exist for a 22-year-old woman alone in the world. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she watched a tall cowboy dismount from a paint horse across the street, his movements fluid and purposeful as he tied the reins to the hitching post outside the saloon. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his stride, made her think he was the kind of man who didn't let injustice stand. She shook her head at her own foolishness and pushed open the door to the land office where Mr. Henderson sat behind his desk, his spectacles perched on his bulbous nose as he reviewed property records. He looked up when she entered, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to uncomfortable sympathy in the span of a heartbeat. She knew that look well after 3 months of receiving it from everyone who had known her father. "Miss Rosewood," Mr. Henderson said, removing his spectacles and setting them carefully on the desk between them. "I received your telegram about coming in today. Have you reviewed the documents I sent?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "The original will that my father filed with you 5 years ago when he changed it to leave everything to me." Mr. Henderson shifted in his chair and pulled out a thick folder. "I have, and I want you to know that I believe your father's intentions were clear when he came to see me in 1877. He specifically stated that you were to inherit the ranch, the livestock, and all associated property." Relief flooded through Sarah's chest. "Then my uncle's claim has no merit. The land is legally mine." "It should be that simple," Mr. Henderson said, his tone heavy with regret. "But your uncle has hired Thomas Blackwell from Austin, one of the most ruthless lawyers in Texas, and he's filed a counterclaim stating that your father was not of sound mind when he changed the will. They're arguing that, as the eldest male relative, the property should pass to your uncle according to common law tradition." "That's absurd," Sarah said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "My father was perfectly healthy and sound when he changed that will." "You witnessed it yourself." "I did, but Blackwell is claiming that any man who would leave such valuable property to a daughter instead of a male relative must have been suffering from some form of mental deterioration." Mr. Henderson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Miss Rosewood, I'll testify on your behalf, but I have to warn you that Judge Morrison tends to favor traditional property transfers. He's old-fashioned in his thinking about women and property rights." Sarah felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. "So even with the legal will, I might lose everything." "The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. I suggest you find yourself a lawyer who can argue your case persuasively, and you'll need witnesses who can testify to your father's sound mind and his intentions." Mr. Henderson pulled out another document. "I've also discovered something troubling. Your uncle has already sold off 50 head of your father's best cattle and pocketed the money. If he's allowed to continue managing the property until the hearing, there might not be much left to inherit." White-hot anger cut through Sarah's despair. Her father had worked himself into an early grave building that ranch, and now his own brother was systematically dismantling his legacy. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Henderson. I won't let my uncle steal what my father built." She walked out into the blazing afternoon sunshine with her mind racing. She had no money for a lawyer, no place to stay, and no clear path forward, but giving up wasn't in her nature. Her father had raised her to be strong, teaching her to ride and rope and manage the ranch books, because he'd always said she had a better head for business than most men he knew. She wouldn't dishonor his memory by surrendering without a fight. The smell of cooking food from the restaurant next door reminded her that she hadn't eaten since dawn, but she had only a few coins left in her pocket. She'd have to find work immediately, though most establishments in Laredo wouldn't hire a woman without references, and her uncle had made sure to spread rumors that she was unstable and untrustworthy. "You look like someone just told you the world was ending," a deep voice said from beside her. Sarah turned to find the cowboy she'd noticed earlier standing a respectful distance away, his hat pushed back to reveal sun-weathered features and gray eyes that held genuine concern rather than pity. He was probably in his mid-20s, tall and lean with the kind of strength that came from hard work rather than mere size. Something about his direct gaze made her want to tell him everything, which was ridiculous since she didn't even know his name. "Just having a difficult day," she said, trying to smile and failing completely. "I'm Samuel Rafferty," he said, extending his hand. "Most people call me Sam. I'm foreman at the Double Creek Ranch about 15 miles north of here." Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses and the firm but gentle grip. "Sarah Rosewood." Recognition flashed across his face. "You're John Rosewood's daughter. I met your father a few times when I first came to Laredo 3 years ago. He was a good man, fair in his dealings." "I was sorry to hear about his passing." "Thank you," Sarah said, and something about his sincerity made her throat tighten with emotion. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough to know that he was proud of you," Sam said. "He came through the Double Creek last year when we were dealing with a boundary dispute, and he talked about how you'd helped him navigate a complicated contract negotiation with a buyer from New Orleans. Said you had more business sense than most men twice your age." Sarah blinked back sudden tears. After months of being told she was incapable of managing property, hearing her father's praise repeated by a stranger felt like a lifeline. "I miss him every day." "I can see you're dealing with something heavy," Sam said carefully. "And I don't mean to pry, but if you need help, I'm a good listener." Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the way he stood there without judgment or assumptions, but Sarah found herself telling him everything. She explained about the will, her uncle's false claims, the lawyer from Austin, and the cattle that had already been sold. She told him about having no money and no place to stay, and how Judge Morrison was unlikely to rule in her favor even with proper documentation. By the time she finished, the sun had moved lower in the sky and Sam's expression had shifted from concern to quiet anger. "That's not right," he said flatly. "Your father's wishes should be honored, and your uncle is nothing but a thief hiding behind legal paperwork." "Knowing it's not right doesn't help me win in court," Sarah said, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "I need a miracle, and those are in short supply." Sam was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant as if working through a problem. Then he looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I might be able to help. The owner of the Double Creek, Mrs. Catherine Harrison, is one of the wealthiest women in South Texas. She inherited the ranch from her husband 10 years ago, and she's had to fight off more than one attempt by male relatives to take it from her. She has connections with lawyers and judges all over the state, and she doesn't take kindly to men who try to cheat women out of their rightful inheritance. Hope sparked in Sarah's chest. You think she would help me? I think she'd be furious if she heard about your situation and didn't help, Sam said with certainty. Come back to the ranch with me tonight. You can stay in one of the guest rooms, and tomorrow morning I'll introduce you to Mrs. Harrison. No promises, but I believe she'll want to intervene. Sarah hesitated. Going off to a strange ranch with a man she'd just met went against every caution her father had ever taught her, but something in Sam's steady gaze told her he was trustworthy. More than that, she was out of options. I don't want to impose. You're not imposing. Mrs. Harrison has helped other women in similar situations, and she's always looking for capable people. Even if she can't help with the legal situation, she might have work for you at the ranch. Sam gestured toward his horse. I know this is a lot to ask, trusting a stranger, but I give you my word that you'll be safe and treated with respect. Sarah looked into his eyes and made a decision based on instinct rather than logic. All right. Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Sam, he corrected with a small smile that transformed his serious features. And you don't need to thank me yet. Let's see if we can actually help first. He retrieved his horse and offered her a hand up. Sarah settled behind him on the paint horse, acutely aware of the warmth of his back against her hands as she held on. They rode out of Lerdo as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the Rio Grande gleaming in the distance like a ribbon of molten copper. The landscape was harsh but beautiful, dotted with mesquite and prickly pear cactus, and Sarah felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders as they left town behind. How did you end up as foreman at the Double Creek? She asked, partly to break the comfortable silence and partly because she was genuinely curious about this man who had offered help without expecting anything in return. Long story, Sam said, but the short version is that I came to Texas from Missouri after my parents died in a fire. I was 20 years old with nothing but a horse and a saddle, looking for work. Mrs. Harrison gave me a job as a ranch hand when most places wouldn't hire someone without experience. I worked hard, learned everything I could, and after 2 years she promoted me to foreman when the previous one retired. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She is. Tough as nails but fair, and she doesn't judge people by anything except their character and their work ethic. Sam glanced back at her. I think you two will get along well. They rode in silence for a while, and Sarah found herself noticing details about Sam that she hadn't registered earlier. The way he sat his horse with unconscious grace, the respectful way he'd helped her mount without any inappropriate touching, the quiet competence in everything he did. She'd known plenty of cowboys in her life growing up on a ranch, but there was something different about Sam Rafferty, something that made her feel safe despite the chaos threatening to consume her life. The Double Creek Ranch appeared as the last light was fading from the sky, a sprawling operation with a large main house, several bunkhouses, extensive corrals, and barns that spoke of prosperity and careful management. Sam rode directly to the main house and dismounted, then helped Sarah down with steady hands. A Mexican woman in her 50s emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Sam, you are back late, she said with a slight accent. Mrs. Harrison was asking about you. Is she still in the study, Rosa? Sam asked. Yes, working on the books as always. Rosa's dark eyes shifted to Sarah with curiosity but no judgment. You have brought a guest. This is Miss Sarah Rosewood. She'll be staying with us for a while. Could you prepare the blue room for her and maybe find her something to eat? She's had a rough day. Rosa's expression softened immediately. Of course. Come, miss. You look exhausted. I will bring you food and hot water for washing. Sarah wanted to protest that she should meet Mrs. Harrison first, but Sam gave her a reassuring nod. "Get settled and have something to eat. I'll talk to Mrs. Harrison and we'll figure everything out in the morning. You're safe here." Something about those 3 words broke through the armor Sarah had been maintaining since her father's death. She felt tears threatening and quickly followed Rosa into the house before she could embarrass herself by crying in front of Sam. The interior was beautifully furnished with dark wood furniture and colorful rugs, speaking of wealth but also comfort. Rosa led her upstairs to a spacious bedroom with a large bed covered in a blue quilt and windows that overlooked the ranch yard. "The water will be ready soon," Rosa said gently. "You have been through something difficult, yes?" "Yes," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sam is a good man. If he brought you here, it is because you need help and Mrs. Harrison will want to provide it." Rosa patted her shoulder. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be better." After Rosa left, Sarah sank onto the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. She was so tired of being strong, of fighting battles that seemed impossible to win, of wondering if justice even existed for women in a world controlled by men's laws and men's assumptions. But sitting here in this comfortable room, knowing that Sam was advocating for her downstairs, she felt the first stirring of hope she'd experienced in months. True to her word, Rosa returned with a pitcher of hot water, a plate of beef stew with fresh bread, and a clean nightgown. Sarah washed away the dust of travel and ate every bite of the delicious food, then crawled into the soft bed and fell asleep almost instantly. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of activity from the ranch yard below. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, and then everything came flooding back. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, the only ones she owned, and made her way downstairs following the smell of coffee and bacon. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with Rosa presiding over the stove while a weathered woman in her 50s sat at the large table reading a newspaper. She looked up when Sarah entered, and her sharp blue eyes took in everything with a single assessing glance. This had to be Mrs. Catherine Harrison. "You must be Sarah Rosewood," the woman said, setting down her newspaper and gesturing to the chair across from her. "Sam told me about your situation last night. Sit down and have some breakfast while we talk." Sarah sat, accepting the cup of coffee that Rosa placed in front of her. "Thank you for allowing me to stay here, Mrs. Harrison. I hope to be able to repay your hospitality. Call me Catherine. I don't stand on ceremony in my own kitchen." Catherine's gaze was direct but not unkind. "Sam says your uncle is trying to steal your inheritance using legal manipulation and outdated ideas about women's capabilities. Is that an accurate assessment?" "Yes, madam. Catherine, I mean." Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup. "My father left everything to me in a properly executed will, but my uncle claims he wasn't of sound mind and has already moved into the ranch house and started selling off cattle." "What's Judge Morrison's position on this?" "The hearing is in 2 weeks." According to Mr. Henderson at the land office, the judge tends to favor traditional property transfers to male relatives. Sarah fought to keep her voice steady. "Even with the legal documentation, I might lose everything my father built." Catherine's expression hardened. "Morrison is an old fool who thinks women are decorative objects rather than capable human beings. I've dealt with him before." She took a sip of her coffee, her mind clearly working through possibilities. "I know 3 lawyers in Austin who specialize in property law and have experience with inheritance disputes. One of them owes me a considerable favor. I'll send a telegram this morning requesting his immediate assistance." Relief nearly overwhelmed Sarah. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." "You can repay me by winning your case and running that ranch the way your father intended." Catherine leaned forward. I inherited the double creek when my husband died, and I spent 5 years fighting off various male relatives who thought they could manage it better. I won because I had resources and connections, but also because I was willing to fight dirty when necessary. Your uncle is counting on you being too poor and too isolated to mount an effective defense. We're going to prove him very wrong." Sam entered the kitchen at that moment, his hat in his hands and his expression hopeful. "Did you tell her about James Crawford?" "I was just getting to that," Catherine said. "James Crawford is one of the best property lawyers in Texas. He's handled several cases involving women's inheritance rights and won most of them. More importantly, he's not intimidated by judges or opposing counsel, no matter how much they bluster." "I can't afford to pay a lawyer from Austin," Sarah admitted, hating how the words tasted. "I spent the last of my money getting back to Laredo. Crawford owes me a favor that has nothing to do with money," Catherine said firmly. "He'll take your case, and we'll figure out payment later if he insists on it. Right now, the priority is stopping your uncle from liquidating more assets and building an airtight case for your ownership." Sam pulled out a chair and sat down, his gaze meeting Sarah's across the table. "I was thinking about something else last night. You need witnesses who can testify to your father's sound mind and his intentions regarding the ranch. I can ask around at the ranches in the area, see who was doing business with him in the months before he died." "That's an excellent idea," Catherine said approvingly. "Sarah, do you have copies of any business correspondence your father conducted? Anything that shows he was making sound decisions and planning for the ranch's future?" "I have some letters in my bag, the one my uncle refused to let me retrieve from the ranch house." Sarah felt anger rising again at the memory. "He had his sons physically block the door when I tried to go inside." "Then we'll need to get those letters," Sam said, his jaw tightening. "What if I ride out to the Rosewood Ranch today with a couple of the ranch hands? Your uncle might think twice about refusing to hand over your personal belongings if he's facing 3 armed men." "That could be seen as intimidation," Catherine warned, though her tone suggested she approved of the idea. "We need to be careful not to give the opposing lawyer any ammunition to paint Sarah as aggressive or unreasonable. What if Sarah writes a formal request for her belongings and we deliver it?" Sam suggested. "If her uncle refuses, we have witnesses to his obstruction, which makes him look petty and vindictive. If he complies, Sarah gets her property back." Catherine nodded slowly. "That could work." "Sarah, write a list of everything you need to retrieve, particularly any documents or letters that might be relevant to the case. Sam will deliver the request and report back on your uncle's response and the condition of the ranch." Over the next hour, Sarah wrote a detailed list of her belongings and composed a formal request that was polite but firm. Sam read it over, his expression growing grimmer as he saw how little Sarah was asking for, just her clothes, her mother's jewelry box, and a trunk containing her father's correspondence and business records. "This is everything you own?" he asked quietly. "Everything that matters," Sarah said. "The ranch itself is what I'm fighting for, not the furniture or household goods." Sam looked at her with something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "You're tougher than most men I know." "I had a good teacher," Sarah said, thinking of her father. "He always said that strength wasn't about how hard you could hit, but about how many times you could be knocked down and still get back up." "Smart man," Sam said. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'll leave within the hour. With luck, I'll be back before dinner." After Sam left, Catherine put Sarah to work helping with the ranch books, explaining that she wanted to see if Sarah really did have the business sense that her father had claimed. Sarah dove into the ledgers with relief. grateful for work that engaged her mind and kept her from worrying about everything that could go wrong. She caught 3 arithmetic errors in the feed costs and suggested a more efficient system for tracking cattle sales that made Catherine smile with approval. "Your father wasn't exaggerating about your abilities," Catherine said as they broke for lunch. "How would you feel about staying on here at the Double Creek after we win your case? I could use someone with your skills to help manage the business side of the operation, and it would give you income while you rebuild your own ranch." "I would be honored," Sarah said honestly. "Though I hope to eventually focus all my energy on my father's ranch. Of course, I'm just saying you'll have options." Catherine poured them both more coffee. "Sam seems quite taken with you." Sarah felt her cheeks heat. "He's been very kind, but I'm sure he's just helping because you asked him to." "Sam helps people because it's in his nature, but I've never seen him look at someone the way he looks at you." Catherine's expression was knowing. "He's a good man, Sarah, one of the best I've ever known." Not many men would ride straight into a potential confrontation to retrieve a stranger's belongings. "We only just met yesterday," Sarah protested weakly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to recognize something worth holding on to." Catherine stood and stretched. "I'm not suggesting you make any decisions right now, especially with everything else you're dealing with. I'm just saying keep your eyes open. Good men are rare, and Sam Rafferty is one of them." The afternoon dragged by with painful slowness as Sarah tried to focus on the ledgers and not imagine all the ways Sam's errand could go wrong. What if her uncle became violent? What if he destroyed the documents out of spite? What if he had already sold off more cattle and there was nothing left to save? The sun was low in the sky when Rosa came to find them in the study. "Sam is back, and he has Sarah's trunk with him." Sarah and Catherine hurried out to the yard where Sam was dismounting along with 2 ranch hands. His expression was controlled fury as he lifted a battered trunk from the back of a supply wagon. "Your uncle is a piece of work," Sam said without preamble. "He tried to claim you'd already been given your belongings, then said the trunk wasn't yours, then finally admitted it was but said you had no right to any of your father's papers. I had to threaten to get the sheriff involved before he'd hand it over." "Was there any trouble?" Catherine asked. "Nothing we couldn't handle, but he's already sold at least 100 head of cattle and fired all the ranch hands your father employed. The place looks like it's being stripped for parts rather than managed as a working ranch." Sam's gray eyes met Sarah's. "I'm sorry. I know that's hard to hear." Sarah felt sick. 100 head of cattle represented months of her father's work and a significant portion of the ranch's value. "Did you see the condition of the buildings?" "The house and barns are still standing, but the corrals need repair and the water system looks like it hasn't been maintained in weeks." Sam's voice was gentle despite the harsh news. "On the positive side, I spoke with 3 of your father's former employees. They all agreed to testify on your behalf about his sound mind and his explicit statements that you were to inherit the ranch. They're angry about being fired without cause and want to see justice done." "That's excellent," Catherine said. "Get their names and locations to Crawford when he arrives. The more witnesses we have, the stronger our case." Sam carried the trunk inside and set it in the study. Sarah knelt beside it with shaking hands, unlocking it with the key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were her mother's jewelry box, several dresses, and most importantly, a thick bundle of letters and business documents. She lifted them out carefully, her eyes already scanning the dates and contents. "These are perfect," she breathed. "Letters from buyers, contracts for cattle sales, correspondence with the bank about loans, all in my father's handwriting and showing clear, logical thinking. Some of these are dated just weeks before he died." "Let me see," Catherine said, taking several letters and reading them quickly. "This is exactly what we need. Your father was clearly planning for the future and making sound business decisions right up until his death. No judge could reasonably claim he was mentally incompetent when he changed his will." Over the next few days, a whirlwind of activity consumed the ranch. James Crawford arrived from Austin, a sharp-faced man in his 40s with piercing dark eyes and a reputation for winning impossible cases. He spent hours interviewing Sarah about her father, the ranch, her uncle's claims, and every detail of the inheritance dispute. He reviewed all the documents with meticulous care and declared that they had a strong case if they could overcome Judge Morrison's biases. "The law is on your side," Crawford said bluntly. "But judges have significant discretion in inheritance disputes, especially when there's a challenge to testamentary capacity. We need to make it impossible for Morrison to rule against you without looking either incompetent or corrupt." "How do we do that?" Sarah asked. "By building such an overwhelming case that any other ruling would be clearly unjust. We'll have witnesses testify to your father's sound mind. We'll present his business correspondence showing clear thinking, and we'll demonstrate that you are perfectly capable of managing the ranch. We'll also expose your uncle's actions as those of a man motivated by greed rather than genuine concern." Sam spent his evenings with Sarah, teaching her everything he knew about current ranching practices and market conditions. They sat in the study after dinner, poring over cattle prices and discussing water rights and breeding programs. But Sarah found herself increasingly distracted by his presence. The way his hands moved when he explained something, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the patient way he answered even her most basic questions without condescension. One evening, a week before the hearing, they were reviewing testimony strategy when Sarah realized she'd been staring at Sam's mouth instead of listening to his words. "I'm sorry. What did you just say?" she asked, feeling her cheeks heat. Sam's eyes crinkled with amusement. "I said that Crawford wants you to be prepared for aggressive cross-examination from your uncle's lawyer. He'll try to paint you as emotional and irrational. That's rich, coming from my uncle who is literally stealing from his dead brother's estate." "Agreed, but we need to make sure you stay calm and factual during the hearing, no matter what accusations he makes." Sam leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "You've been through so much in the past few months. How are you really doing?" The gentle question, combined with the genuine concern in his eyes, nearly undid Sarah's composure. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "What if we lose? What if my father's life work ends up in my uncle's hands and there's nothing I can do about it?" "Then we'll figure out another path forward," Sam said firmly. "But I don't think we're going to lose. Crawford is brilliant. Catherine has made sure all the right people know about this case, and you have the law on your side." "Thank you for everything you've done," Sarah said softly. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me that day in Lerdo." "I'm glad I was there," Sam said, and something in his tone made Sarah's pulse quicken. "Sarah, I know this isn't the right time with everything you're dealing with, but I want you to know that helping you isn't just about doing what's right. These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, seeing your strength and intelligence and determination, I've found myself thinking about you constantly." Sarah's breath caught. "Sam, I'm not asking you for anything," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know that when this is over, when you've won your ranch back and things have settled down, I'd like to court you properly. If you're interested." "I'm interested," Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess them. "I've been trying not to think about it because I can't afford any distractions right now, but you've been on my mind too. The way you helped me without hesitation, the way you treat me like an equal, The way you make me feel safe even when everything else is falling apart." Sam reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Then we have something to look forward to after the hearing." The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Crawford drilled Sarah on potential questions, Catherine coached her on courtroom demeanor, and Sam continued providing emotional support and practical help. The night before the hearing, Sarah barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome. The morning dawned clear and hot, typical for Texas in late June. Sarah dressed in her best dress, a dark blue cotton that Catherine had insisted on buying for her, and tried to calm her racing heart. The entire household gathered for breakfast, and Rosa pressed a small medal of St. Jude into Sarah's hand. "For impossible causes," Rosa said with a warm smile, "though I do not think yours is impossible." They rode into Lerdo in Catherine's large carriage, Crawford reviewing final strategy while Sam sat beside Sarah, his presence a solid comfort. The courthouse was a two-story brick building in the center of town, and a surprising number of people had gathered outside, word of the case having spread throughout the community. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Sarah saw her uncle Nathaniel sitting at the plaintiff's table with his lawyer, the infamous Thomas Blackwell, a silver-haired man with cold eyes and an expensive suit. Nathaniel avoided her gaze, his face set in grim lines. Judge Morrison entered and everyone rose. He was exactly as Sarah had imagined, an elderly man with white whiskers and a stern expression that suggested he'd already made up his mind about the proper order of the world. The hearing began with opening statements. Blackwell painted Sarah as an inexperienced girl who had manipulated her dying father into changing his will, motivated by greed and disrespect for family tradition. He argued that the ranch would be mismanaged under her control, and that Nathaniel, as an experienced rancher and the eldest male relative, was the rightful heir according to common law principles. Crawford's opening was masterful. He spoke of John Rosewood's clear intentions, his pride in his daughter's abilities, and his right as a property owner to dispose of his estate as he saw fit. He described Nathaniel's actions since John's death, the fired employees, the sold cattle, and the refusal to allow Sarah access to her own belongings, painting a picture of a man motivated by greed rather than family concern. The testimony phase began with witnesses for Nathaniel's side, neighbors who claimed that John Rosewood had seemed forgetful and confused in his final months. Crawford dismantled each testimony with precision, pointing out that the incidents described were normal behavior for a busy rancher, and that none of the witnesses had any medical expertise to diagnose mental deterioration. Then, it was their turn. Crawford called witness after witness, former employees who testified to John Rosewood's sharp mind and explicit statements about Sarah inheriting the ranch. He presented business letters showing sound decision-making right up until John's death. He called Catherine Harrison to testify about women's capabilities in managing large ranching operations, and her testimony was so compelling that even Judge Morrison seemed to pay attention. Finally, Crawford called Sarah to the stand. She walked forward with her head high, aware of every eye in the courtroom following her. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, then settled into the witness chair. Crawford's direct examination was straightforward. Sarah described her father's ranching operation, her role in managing the books and contracts, and his explicit wishes for her to inherit. She spoke clearly and factually, just as they'd practiced, and she could see several of the spectators nodding in agreement. Then came Blackwell's cross-examination. He approached her with a predatory smile, his questions designed to provoke and undermine. "Miss Rosewood, isn't it true that you've never actually managed a cattle ranch by yourself?" "I managed the business aspects of my father's ranch for 3 years before his death, including all financial records, contract negotiations, and market sales," Sarah replied calmly. "But the physical work, the actual ranching that was done by men under your father's supervision, wasn't it?" "The physical work was done by experienced ranch hands, just as it is on every large ranch in Texas, including my uncle's properties," Sarah said. "Ranch owners manage operations. They don't personally do every task." Blackwell's smile tightened. "Isn't it true that you were away from the ranch for 3 months after your father's death?" "I was in San Antonio settling my father's debts and ensuring his business obligations were met, which is exactly what a responsible property manager should do." "Or perhaps you were avoiding the responsibilities of ranch management because you knew you were incapable of handling them." "I was honoring my father's financial commitments," Sarah said firmly. "Something my uncle apparently has no interest in doing, given that he's been liquidating assets for personal profit rather than maintaining the ranch as a functioning business." The courtroom murmured at that, and Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Blackwell tried several more angles, but Sarah remained calm and factual, refusing to be provoked into emotional responses. By the time Crawford's redirect examination was complete, Sarah felt she'd done everything possible to present her case. The final witness was devastating to Nathaniel's case. Crawford called the banker from Lerdo, who testified that John Rosewood had met with him just 2 months before his death to discuss expansion plans for the ranch, demonstrating clear future planning and sound financial thinking. He also testified that Nathaniel had recently approached him about a loan against the ranch property, suggesting he was already treating it as his own. Closing arguments were passionate on both sides. Blackwell appealed to tradition and masculine authority, while Crawford appealed to justice, property rights, and the clear intentions of a dying man. When both lawyers finished, Judge Morrison announced he would take a brief recess to consider his ruling. Sarah sat between Sam and Catherine during the agonizing wait, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. Sam covered her hands with one of his, and she held on like he was an anchor in a storm. After 40 minutes that felt like hours, Judge Morrison returned. The courtroom fell silent as he settled into his chair and adjusted his spectacles. "I've reviewed the evidence and testimony presented today," he began, his voice gravelly with age. "This court recognizes that inheritance disputes involving female heirs present unique challenges in interpretation of testamentary intent." Sarah's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a ruling against her. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "the evidence in this case is clear and compelling. John Rosewood executed a valid will in 1877, properly witnessed and filed with the county, explicitly leaving his property to his daughter Sarah Rosewood. The testimony regarding his mental capacity in the months before his death has shown him to be a sound businessman making rational decisions about his property. The plaintiff has failed to provide any credible evidence of mental deterioration or undue influence." Sarah hardly dared to breathe. "Furthermore," the judge said, his tone hardening, "this court is troubled by evidence that the defendant has been treating the disputed property as his own before the legal question of ownership was resolved. The sale of significant livestock assets and the dismissal of longtime employees suggests motivations of personal profit rather than proper stewardship." Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Blackwell's expression remained carefully neutral. "Therefore, This court rules in favor of Sarah Rosewood. The will of John Rosewood, dated March 15, 1877, is upheld as valid and enforceable. All property, livestock, and assets of the Rosewood Ranch are hereby confirmed as the legal property of Sarah Rosewood. The defendant is ordered to vacate the ranch property within 7 days and to provide a full accounting of all assets sold or transferred since John Rosewood's death, with appropriate financial restitution to be calculated and paid within 30 days. The judge banged his gavel. This hearing is concluded. The courtroom erupted. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Catherine hugged her tightly, and Crawford shook her hand with a satisfied smile. Sam pulled her into his arms, holding her as she shook with relief and joy, and the release of months of pent-up fear. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "You won." "We did it," Sarah corrected, pulling back to look at him through her tears. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The next week was a chaos of activity. Nathaniel vacated the ranch house with poor grace, removing only his personal belongings under the watchful eye of the sheriff. Sarah moved back into her childhood home, and Sam helped her assess the damage from her uncle's mismanagement. The accounting revealed that Nathaniel had sold nearly 200 head of cattle, but the judge ordered full restitution plus damages, which would give Sarah the capital she needed to rebuild. She rehired several of her father's former employees, and Sam helped her develop a management plan for the ranch. Catherine invited her to continue working part-time on the Double Creek books, providing additional income while the Rosewood Ranch recovered. Sarah threw herself into the work with fierce determination, honoring her father's memory by doing exactly what he'd believed she was capable of. Sam rode over to the Rosewood Ranch every evening after finishing his work at the Double Creek. They would review the day's progress, plan for the next steps, and then sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Their relationship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect and shared values, and the connection that had sparked that first day in Laredo. One evening in early August, as they sat on the porch swing her father had built, Sam took her hand and cleared his throat nervously. "Sarah, I know we've only known each other for 2 months, but they've been the most important 2 months of my life," he said. "You're the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I've ever met, and I can't imagine my future without you in it. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Sarah's heart felt like it might burst. "I love you too, Sam. You saw me at my lowest point and helped me without asking for anything in return. You treated me like an equal when the rest of the world wanted to treat me like a child. You're everything I've ever wanted in a partner." Sam kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "That's absolutely a yes," Sarah confirmed. They were married in September of 1882, in a small ceremony at the Rosewood Ranch, with Catherine serving as Sarah's attendant and several of the Double Creek Ranch hands standing up with Sam. Rosa cried happy tears throughout the ceremony, and even Judge Morrison attended, commenting gruffly that he was pleased to see such a capable young woman properly settled. Sam moved his belongings to the Rosewood Ranch, and they spent their first months of marriage working side by side to rebuild what Sarah's uncle had damaged. Sam continued as foreman of the Double Creek while also helping manage the Rosewood operation, and the two ranches developed a partnership that benefited both properties. By the following spring, Sarah was pregnant. She continued managing the ranch books and contracts throughout her pregnancy, refusing to be sidelined by something as natural as carrying a child. Sam was simultaneously terrified and overjoyed, hovering protectively while also respecting her need to remain active and engaged. Their son was born in January of 1884, a healthy boy with Sam's gray eyes and Sarah's dark hair. They named him John Samuel, honoring Sarah's father and marking the beginning of their own family legacy. Sam held his son with reverent wonder, and Sarah fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him become a father. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Sarah's business acumen combined with Sam's practical ranching knowledge made them a formidable team. And within 3 years, the Rosewood Ranch had not only recovered from Nathaniel's depredations, but had expanded significantly. They added water rights, improved their breeding stock, and developed a reputation for honest dealing and quality cattle. Catherine Harrison became like family, doting on John Samuel and eventually on the daughter who arrived 2 years later, Emma Rose. Rosa insisted on helping with the children whenever Sarah needed to focus on ranch business, and the extended family they'd built around themselves was a source of constant joy. Sarah's uncle Nathaniel left Texas after being forced to pay restitution, and she never saw him again. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that justice had been served and her father's legacy was secure. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Sam and Sarah stood on the porch of the ranch house watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the land that had brought them together. John was 9 years old and already showing interest in ranch management, while 7-year-old Emma was fearless on horseback. "You ever think about that day in Lerdo when we met?" Sarah asked, leaning against Sam's solid warmth. "All the time," Sam admitted. "I saw you standing there looking lost and angry and determined, and something in me recognized that you were important, that helping you was the most significant thing I could do." "You saved me," Sarah said softly. "Not just my inheritance, but me. You gave me hope when I had none, and you stood by me when I had every reason to give up." "You saved yourself," Sam corrected gently. "I just made sure you had the tools and support to fight. You did the hard work, standing up in that courtroom, facing down your uncle, rebuilding the ranch. I'm proud of you every single day." Sarah turned in his arms and kissed him, still feeling that spark that had drawn them together. "I love you, Sam Rafferty." "I love you too, Sarah Rafferty," he replied. "And I'm grateful every day that I walked across that street to talk to a beautiful woman who looked like she needed help." They stood together as darkness fell, watching their children chase fireflies in the warm Texas evening, surrounded by the land they'd fought for and the life they'd built together. Sarah knew her father would be proud of what she'd accomplished, not just in keeping the ranch but in creating a family and a future that honored his memory while forging something entirely new. The Rosewood Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family as a testament to one woman's refusal to accept injustice and one man's decision to stand beside her in the fight. The story of how Sarah nearly lost everything and Sam made sure justice was served became local legend, told and retold as an example of courage, love, and the power of standing up for what was right even when the odds seemed impossible. Years later, when Sarah was an old woman sitting on that same porch with her grandchildren gathered around her, they would ask her to tell the story again. She would smile and begin with the day she stood on the street in Lerdo with nothing but a piece of paper and a cowboy's kindness, and she would end with the truth she'd learned through all of it. That love and justice were worth fighting for, that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the worst circumstances if you were brave enough to keep standing when everything tried to knock you down.